Looks like we've got a quorum, so we're covered on that front. Uh, First item is, are there any bill introductions today? Okay, seeing a resounding none, we'll move on to the second item. The minutes were sent out for our January 25th meeting. Any concerns with that, or otherwise I'd like to go ahead and approve committee meeting minutes for the 25th. Representative Neighbor?
I move approval of the minutes.
Approval has been moved. A second. Representative O'Hobson. So with that, the meeting minutes are approved. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes? Say aye. Any opposed? All right, the meeting minutes are approved. And the next and only item that we have for today is a presentation. And the presenter is Tom Cox. He's someone that should be familiar with folks here in the State House for any number of years. He served as a representative of District 17 in Shawnee from 2017 to 21. And he is now vice president of Connected Nation. And he's going to speak to us today about some work he's doing to build an exchange point on the internet here. And I've asked him to kind of go back and give us an internet 101, just because I'm a context person. So I kind of like to understand when you're talking to me about adding to something, what it is that we're adding to. So with that, welcome to committee, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman, ranking member, distinguished members of this committee, Representative Hoheisel. It's an honor to be in front of this committee, actually speaking in front of it. It is a distinct privilege to be presenting in front of this committee, as I had the honor of serving on it for 4 years, and I can say without a doubt, it was both my favorite committee to serve on, but I found it to be the most educational and enlightening, and was fortunate enough that much of what I learned in this committee ended up leading to the career I am in now, which is in the broadband world. So I am with a nonprofit, a 501c3 based out of Kentucky, even though our entire workforce is remote and spread across 30 states, called Connected Nation. We have been in the broadband space for over 20 years. We were founded in Kentucky, started as an economic development project for how to help rural Kentucky get broadband access. And then after we kind of helped solve a couple different issues there, multiple states said, hey, can you come replicate this in our state? And then we grew out of that into a national organization. Our core services over the years have been doing grant administration, doing GIS mapping and broadband data validation. So a lot of times you hear about the maps, where is service, what is underserved, where is served, where has no service. So for multiple states, they contract us to go actually perform and present those maps to them. We do a lot with digital literacy, especially in low-income communities, making sure that they have access to both technology, but the skill sets they need for entering the modern-day workforce. But then also what I focus most of my time on is open access, carrier-neutral, what we call middle-mile infrastructure, particularly internet exchange points, which I'll get into a little bit what they are today, but they are essentially what makes the internet work, but no one really knows they exist. As Representative, the Vice Chair requested, I'm going to do kind of a quick briefer if you want to go a couple slides in. A quick briefer on internet. Some of these terms you guys are all going to know, but I just want to provide them for you. So as I reference other things, they make a little bit of sense. So one of the things that I didn't actually realize for many years is the difference between the internet and broadband. The internet is just the general, what we'll call the World Wide Web, the interconnection of thousands upon thousands of different networks, content providers, websites, ISPs connecting to each other. Broadband is a specific FCC defined term. To call yourself broadband, you actually have to meet certain speeds. Currently, it's 25 megabytes download and 3 megabytes upload, but the FCC is likely moving that soon to 100 megabytes download and 20 megabytes upload. So if you hear people say, oh, I provide broadband versus other people may say, oh, we provide internet, it's actually a speed difference. So a lot of people think, oh, they're the same thing. they're not, because broadband is a federally defined term. So download speed, if you ever hear that reference, is the speed at which data is transferred from a third-party provider to your computer or your device. So it's how you're pulling data down. Upload speed is the speed at which your device sends data back out. So when you're accessing Netflix per se, your download speed is dependent on how fast Netflix can send data to you. Your upload speed is determined how fast you can send data from your computer back to Netflix. ISPs, I think this is an easy one, but internet service providers, that's just a company that provides internet to home businesses, and is often referred to as what we call last mile infrastructure. Something I'll be mentioning a lot is wholesale internet. So wholesale internet, these are or wholesale internet providers. These are companies that are like ISPs, often for ISPs. So they sell access to the internet a lot of time to smaller internet providers. So you can imagine that they are the interstate system of the internet out there. And actually, some of them do provide at home to businesses internet, but the vast majority of them actually sell internet to other internet companies. They don't actually provide internet to you individually or to your business. They are the interstate system out throughout the United States, connecting the major networks together, and then selling that connection to smaller ISPs. If you want to go to the next slide. This one gets a visual. So the difference between bandwidth and latency, you will hear about bandwidth all day long. Bandwidth is the rate at which data flows. So when you're talking about like, oh, my house just got gigabit internet, I can get a gigabit down, I can get a gigabit up, upload speeds. That is bandwidth. And so if you think about it like a water pipe, so bandwidth is how wide is the tube, how much water can flow through it at any one time. So if you have a low bandwidth connection, it's a very narrow pipe. If you have a large one, you can flow more through it. You'll also hear about latency. Latency is the time at which it takes that data to go through it. And people kind of combine these or convolute them very often, because bandwidth is the only way to change that is making the pipe bigger. Latency, the only way to lower latency is to reduce the distance that data is traveling. So if you're in, let's say, Great Bend, Kansas, and you're wanting to access Hulu, well, you're got to go from your computer at home to wherever they have their data locally cached. If that's 400 miles away, then your internet has to travel literally 400 miles to access that content and 400 miles back. You can have gigabit internet speeds and you still may get that little spinning wheel as it's buffering. That's latency, because even though light travels at an absurdly fast pace, you can't make the speed of light yet go faster than the speed of light. So it still has to travel that round trip distance. So now you may potentially be talking about 800 miles that your data is traveling to access content. And so that is your latency. So you may see it in different things where it will say, oh, my latency is 30 milliseconds. The human eye can actually perceive latency anything above 13 milliseconds. If you're ever watching a video and it kind of skips, or if you're playing a video game and you feel like you're bouncing around, or you're on a Zoom call and it's kind of pausing for a second, or the person freezes for a second and the audio kicks back in, that's mostly latency is what you're experiencing. It's the data going back and forth. And that's going to play a really big role in what we're talking about with internet exchange points, because that's one of the main problems they're trying to solve. You can go to the next one. And I'm sure you guys have talked about this before, the different types of internet providers. Having served on this committee, I know that the government relations lobbying corps in this committee are phenomenal. The education work they do for the committee, in the committee, outside the committee, is top notch. But just a quick rundown, and then I want you guys just to have these. But like, you'll hear DSL. It's a type of internet. It utilizes phone lines to transfer data. Cable internet specifically references internet that utilizes coaxial cables to transfer data. The new hot topic thing that's constantly referenced is fiber optic. Fiber optic is usually glass. It can be plastic as well, but it uses that to transfer it uses light carrying data over it, and it's typically it is the fastest way to transfer data currently because it moves at the speed of light. Um, it also fiber optic tends to have better upload speeds compared to the others. You may get something that has 100 gigabytes download, but 100 megabytes upload. Where fiber usually can do what we call symmetrical. So usually whatever you can do down, you can do up almost symmetrically. Fixed wireless. This is a service provider that uses radio waves. So oftentimes they'll have like little antennas or satellites on top of them. It's used mostly for rural areas where they struggle to get broadband access. It's a great solution to a difficult problem where if it costs $1 million to build to your house, no one's going to spend $1 million building fiber to your house or coaxial or DSL necessarily. But so it's a good solution. But the problem is you have to have a direct connection. So windstorms can interrupt those radio waves. They can move your tower, and all of a sudden your satellite's not working. Satellite internet. Satellite internet. This is a fun one because you hear a lot about Starlink. Satellite internet's been around for a while. They use satellites to beam internet from each other back down to the ground and then back up. But satellite internet is typically about 22,000 miles above the Earth surface. So again, it can get really rural areas. But if you can imagine how much data has to travel, if we're talking about 400 miles, imagine if you're sending your data 22,000 miles every time you're trying to access the internet. It's relatively slow. You hear a lot about like Starlink, and they're called low Earth orbit or LEO, not named after the chairman, unfortunately, but I will let him take credit if he would like to. Internet. And so it's the same technology as satellite internet, but they put them significantly lower in the orbit. So they're actually between about 100 miles and 1,200 miles above the Earth's surface. So that the reduction in the distance it's traveling is astronomical. And that's why Starlink's been able to actually offer significantly faster speeds, high speed internet in a lot of cases. In communities because that data. They also tend to do a method where if you've ever seen them at night, the string of them following, they're trying to really build more of a network where you're always able to access them instead of one larger satellite that's, higher up, so it's easier to access it at one shot. But so these are a really good solution to areas that don't have the ability to get any access. The problem again is you get pretty good download speeds, but they tend to have horrendous upload speeds. And the reason for that is the technology in the satellite is amazing. They can beam stuff to you really great, but you're going to be limited by the technology at your house to send data back to them. So not only do you have the latency issue, the distance traveled, but they have $1 billion satellite and you have a $200 switch that sends the data back to them. So sending back to them is always going to be an issue. So again, it is an imperfect but good solution to a lot of areas that can't access internet. As we've seen in situations like Ukraine and other war-torn areas, they offer a great solution on getting people back up online pretty instantaneously if physical infrastructure has been destroyed at the level. So it is a very critical, needed piece, and it's a great solution to improving what satellite internet was. And then you have cellular internet. Cellular internet is using mobile phone networks to interconnect and using their technology, using a cellular signal. So 4G, LTE, 5G, those things. That's becoming actually more common nowadays, not just for your cell phones, but actually providing service options. I know you guys talk about that pretty extensively, especially with small cell technology in this committee, which I didn't know what a small cell was until I served on this committee. You can go to the next slide.
Mr. Cox, I think Representative Berquist has a question.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Tom. On the subject of Starlink, when we see those series of satellites, do those series of satellites stay together that close, or do they spread out?
My understanding is they actually pretty much stay in that pattern indefinitely. I don't know if there is over time some larger degree of spread, but
they're designed to work together in a link.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, they're typically smaller, and then they kind of all link to each other. They're trying to provide. It's kind of like actually small cell versus big cell technology. They're trying to use smaller ones, more evenly distributed around the orbit to provide continuous coverage. Where a lot of times traditional satellite internet is much larger, but it's not as well. Like they're more powerful, but it's going to have the same level of coverage.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Starlink is the famous one, but there's actually quite a few other low Earth orbit satellite companies out there. that are providing similar services. They just don't make the news as much. A lot of them are foreign-based as well. So internet exchange points, which is what I work on. So an internet exchange point is kind of the hub for the internet. It allows all types of internets to internet providers, transport networks, tier one carriers, mobile networks, cloud and content providers to interconnect with each other. So really what we're talking about is how does the internet functionally work? So if you're on Cox Communication and you're sending an email to someone who is on Google Fiber, how do they talk to each other? They are separate independent networks. So how do they transfer that data? Well, a lot of times the bulk of the internet actually transfers at what's called an internet exchange point. It looks like a data center, and I'll show you some renderings later. It looks like a data center but it's not a data center. It's not storage compute. It's for interconnection. So they actually physically talk to each other. These networks connect into there, and then they can connect to each other and transfer data. So when you want to go access Netflix, your data is going to transfer to a location where it can talk to Netflix. Netflix is sending from their data centers to this facility, and then you're sending your data to this facility, and they have a conversation with each other and say, Representative Hoheisel wants to access X content from Netflix, and Netflix says, okay, we're going to send it. We're going to route that traffic directly to you. This works for every website, every service provider, Facebook, Google, to websites like Booking.com. I mean, you have to physically exchange traffic. Where they are held on servers has to talk to somewhere where you are internet service provider can. If you want to think of it in a visual, think of it as the old telephone switchboards. So people were literally physically in there saying, okay, you want to call this person? They're moving the line and putting the other. The internet actually still functionally operates identically to that. It's just all automated. So it's just going to a place where it's all automated. You've got little strands of fiber connecting each other, and they're talking to each other in this automated fashion. But it actually is the exact same concept as that. If you go in there, I mean, if you visualize it as that, it's like, oh, this is the same thing as an old operator switchboard. It's just all digital. IXPs literally, if you want the next one, yeah. They make the internet work better. So the closer you are to an IXP, the better your internet performance will be. We talked about reducing latency and lag time. The only way to solve latency is to close the physical distance in which you're accessing content. So that's what IXPs do. You bring cloud and content, ISPs, and networks closer to the end user. If you go to the next one. IXPs, they exist essentially in about 57 metro areas across the U.S. 14 states and 3 U.S. territories have no IXP within their borders at all. And there's also 3 additional states that have what we would consider failing IXPs. For example, New Mexico has 1 IXP in Albuquerque. And as the city told us at one point, they said, we are not allowed to go to that building because we will have to condemn it if any of our inspectors see it by law. So, but they know they can't condemn that building because the entire state's backbone of their internet runs through it. So they're in this very difficult bind. So they're like, so we would consider that functionally limited IXP because it is 1 citation away from not existing. And the state is working on funding building a new one somewhere else and then bringing those network providers over. Kansas is one of those states that does not have an IXP within its border. And that's what the end goal of this presentation will be, is that our organization received a grant to build the first IXP in the state of Kansas. And I will kind of get into that a little more later. But right now, the major IXP that the state utilizes is in Kansas City, Missouri, 1102 Grand, about a block off Power and Light, if you're familiar with downtown Kansas City. It's a large white building that you would never realize is the backbone for pretty much the entire Midwest's internet. And so it's very inauspicious, but it's one of the most critical pieces of infrastructure in the area. And it is where I would say the vast majority of Kansas traffic runs through. You would think the western half would build more to Denver, but it's all about, there's a large IXP in Denver, And the problem is that you have to have physical connections to get to these locations, right? So it doesn't matter if one is closer to you. If you don't have infrastructure building to it, you can't access it. The state was kind of, as it was built east to west, as this IXP was developed in downtown Kansas City, Missouri, things naturally built towards it. So you have a lot of the data on the western side of the state running to the crossing the Missouri border to access content and running back to you. If you want to go to the next. So I kind of already started getting this on the next one, but communities without an IXP typically have to what we call backhaul their traffic to cities potentially hundreds of miles away that do have an IXP. Now, I will say there are some exceptions to this rule. Larger carriers, actually, like AT&T, Cox Communication, the larger carriers out there nationally, they oftentimes have their own internal network system to do this. Now, they connect to these IXPs as well, but they have their own systems where they may have their own cloud and content providers that they cache with that only their network is allowed to access. It's a very good solution for their customers, but they have the scale and size where they can do that as well. So one of the things I should have probably addressed earlier is there's kind of what we think about as like 3 tiers of internet. So I mentioned, long haul carriers or tier 1 providers. These are carriers that imagine it as the interstate system. They are the actual interstates running across the United States providing internet. They typically, most of them do not provide internet service to homes and businesses, as I mentioned, like wholesale providers. They are just out there to be the, let's say, the interstate system out there. Companies like Hurricane Electric and Zayo and, well, Lumen does provide. They used to be Level 3, which was this, and they bought them, but Lumen actually is one of those companies that does both. AT&T is like this. They have their own massive network across the United States, and then they also provide at-home services. Then you have what we refer to as last mile, which that's the internet that physically connects to your home and businesses, and your ISPs. So if you imagine the last mile as your roads and streets in your town, right? So it's the streets you drive on all the time. So now, if an interstate runs through your city, that's great. Your streets and roads can connect directly to the interstate. You can hop on and go, right? But what happens if you're a city that's 100 miles away from the interstate, which in Kansas, there's quite a few of those communities. So how do you access the internet? You can have the best fiber in the world running through your city, but if it can't access these larger carriers, these tier 1 providers, you don't have access to the internet. So you have something that's often referred to as middle mile infrastructure. Middle mile, think of it like your state highway system. So it interconnects. If you have a gap between your last mile and the wholesale, the tier 1, the interstate system, they interconnect the two together. And sometimes they are their own providers, sometimes they're third-party providers. So, for example, like I believe in the state of Kansas, AT&T, oftentimes they have this vast network, smaller ISPs that may serve a city of, let's say, 5,000 people. That's their only service territory. They don't have the infrastructure to connect to Kansas City. But if they're 100 miles from Kansas City, they have to get there somehow. So they may pay AT&T, who has lines running near them, and say, "Hey, can we hop on your fiber and then connect this, and we'll pay you what's called a transit fee." So we'll pay you this transit fee to utilize your fiber to connect us to Kansas City. So then our customers can access all of these cloud and content providers. So we can connect with the broader interstate system of the highway, of the internet. So it's fundamentally, I mean, the internet works identically to our road and highway infrastructure system. And the connections it's not as the crow flies. If, you may be 100 miles as the crow flies, but it's based on where the infrastructure is run. So it may be 100 miles in a straight line and 170 miles based on how your fiber paths get there. So distance continues to matter. And we haven't had to worry as much about distance, about latency, because so many communities lack bandwidth access. If you have low speed internet, latency doesn't matter because you can't access and pull the content down very fast. You wouldn't even notice latency because the time it takes to download and upload. But now that we are going to get significant, I mean, probably 95+% of the nation will what is defined as high-speed internet here by 2025, 2026, through a lot of state efforts and federal funding programs like the BEAD program, which was a $45 billion program distributed to the states. All of a sudden, latency is going to become a massive issue because now you have high-speed internet, but if you have high latency, you're still not able to access the internet at an even playing field. And we talk a lot about the digital divide. The digital divide is who has access to high-speed internet and who doesn't. Well, the new digital divide is going to become a latency battle. Who has access to low latency access to content providers, cloud and content, and who doesn't? If you want to actually go one more. So one of the other real benefits of an IXP is they lower transport costs. So if you're that small service provider, you have to buy access to the greater internet, right? And you may have to pay a third-party provider to connect to it. So the further you have to pay, the further you have to connect to them, the more you have to pay. Well, that's going to pretty much universally be passed down to the cost of your internet because it is a fixed cost for the internet service provider. Here's how much we have to pay to connect to the internet. So that's going to increase your costs. So we're already seeing a lot of communities. We actually were talking to an ISP in Georgia, rural Georgia. They got a federal grant. They built out this amazing gigabit fiber optic to the small community. And they are about to go bankrupt because it costs them more money to buy transport to connect to the greater internet than they can afford to charge their customers. People aren't interested. They don't want to buy it. So they're trying to figure out how do they solve that. So they actually reached out to us and said, can you build an IXP closer to us to reduce our distance that we're having to send data, to make it so we don't have to buy transport costs. Wholesale providers are building to our community. And we can just buy directly from them. Cloud and content providers will be in this community. We don't have to. So there is going to be in the rural areas, there is going to be this issue in some of these communities. Not all these communities. It's, there's a lot of great solutions, to this issue. Like the Kansas Fiber Network was a really good solution of smaller ISPs banding together to form their own integral network to connect out to places like Kansas City. And I think they connect to Denver as well, but don't quote me on that, to access cloud and content. But it is happening in a lot of these smaller communities that they are not only having high latency, but they actually can't afford the cost because the transport costs can be so high in some of these communities. Look at the next slide. And you can pull up all three of these real quick. So the primary benefits of an IXP we're talking about, so latency reduction, like we've talked about pretty extensively. You've got to reduce the distance that your internet is traveling to connect to cloud and content providers. There's cost reduction, which is for ISPs, reducing the amount they potentially have to pay on transport fees and transit to connect to the greater internet to access those cloud and content. And then networks resiliency. Like I said, the vast majority of our state and multiple states around us actually connect their data through Kansas City. If someone took that facility down, it's not like you can just magically be like, oh yeah, well we're just going to pop a new one up. This is physical infrastructure. And so you would now have to, if we have the lines, which we probably do, we're probably backed up to Chicago. So that's great. Okay, so now we're reconnecting to Chicago and pulling our data from there. Well, now you've essentially tripled the distance in which your data has to travel to access content. And imagine what that does to the cost for a lot of these providers, because now you're not buying transit to Kansas City, you're buying transit to Chicago. So this is one of the really concerning things to our organization and a lot of people in this space about the broadband, the internet infrastructure out there, is that a lot of communities are single threaded to a single point of failure. And by what we want to do is build a network of IXPs and what we'd call tier 2, tier 3 markets, smaller communities that don't have them, to build a more resilient network. So if one goes down, your traffic's rerouting to another one, not 800 miles away, but maybe 100 or 200 miles away. But build right now is it's just, it's a couple lines from one place to the other. We want to turn it into a spider web of connectivity. So no, there can't be a single point of failure. And there's going to be bigger ones and smaller ones throughout the US. I mean, not all IXPs are equal. If you go to the next slide, I'll actually illustrate that. So this is a map of where all the IXPs are, internet service or internet exchange points. Oftentimes, I should have mentioned this earlier, they're called carrier hotels or colo facilities. Those terms are all interchangeable. There's actually a lot of debate in the interconnection industry on what you call them. But we think the most generally agreed upon term is internet exchange point. So this is a map of where they are throughout the US. But I'm going to use, if you look at Missouri, for example, so that's the one in Kansas City, Missouri, which is a major IXP throughout the nation. The largest one is actually in downtown New York City. Probably the second largest one, I think, is in Dallas, Texas now. So you see there's a lower one in Missouri. So that's Springfield, Missouri. That's an IXP, except it is owned by what's a company called Bluebird, which they're a transport tier 1 provider. They sell internet to internet companies. And it doesn't have cloud and content. It is solely designed for them to sell to a handful of their customers in the area. So technically, it meets the definition of an IXP. Multiple people are transferring, exchanging traffic there, but it is not the same as what Kansas City is, where you have over 150 networks transferring data between each other. It is a major, major interconnection facility for the United States. But the one in Springfield shows up on the map, even though it's like 5 or 6 networks. Really, they're just there to buy wholesale internet for themselves to reduce their costs. So not all IXPs are equal throughout the United States as well. There are IXPs with 3 networks in them, but they show up and they get defined. Actually, I think the one up in North Dakota meets that definition. I think that may be the one. I'd have to double check, but it has like 3 networks in it. There's one in, Alabama technically has one, and it is growing, but, a year ago it had 5 or 6 networks. Now it has 15 networks in it. The one in New York City has over 300 networks interconnecting. Dallas is 250 plus networks interconnecting with each other. But you can also you can see on the map here are the states and regions that don't have them, but also the distance traveled. So in ours, you may think, oh, if I'm in Southeast Kansas, well, we can access that facility in Springfield. You can't. You don't have infrastructure building to it currently. But also, even if you did, your traffic would then route from there to Kansas City to access all the cloud and content providers because they don't have that. You can pull up the next one. So this is a map of 2 different wholesale or tier 1 providers. So this is their major fiber, what we'll call their interstate system. And I pulled them up because I wanted to illustrate that they don't build through Kansas. You'll notice that they go to Kansas City, and both of them build up to Omaha, and then across from there to Denver, and then they build down to Tulsa, and then in one case at Oklahoma City and down to Dallas. This is because most wholesale and tier 1 providers, they build from IXP to IXP. And they occasionally create what we call a pop site, where if they have someone says, we want to buy your internet and we'll help pay for infrastructure, they'll say, okay, well, we'll put a little building here where you can connect to our main lines and buy. Like, for example, that's what happens in Tulsa. Tulsa doesn't actually have an IXP, but they have a couple of providers that sell to local providers there. So when a state doesn't have an IXP within its border, as these companies are building their interstate system of internet connectivity, they build around our state because there's no real need to build to our state. So by building an IXP within the state of Kansas, you're going to redefine this map because all of a sudden these carriers are going to start building to the IXP we will be building in Wichita, Kansas. So they will start naturally saying, okay, well, now it makes sense to run down I-35 to build to the Wichita facility. And then they'll say, oh, well, here, okay, now we're going to build south to Dallas, Oklahoma City and Dallas. And they'll go, okay, well, now we're going to build up to I-70 in Salina and then build over to Denver. So this is really critically important because eventually these companies will kind of, to some degree, max out their building capability. They will build out their internet infrastructure. They'll always be adding to some level. But if our state continuously gets skipped over, we're going to have less access to these wholesale providers out there, which in turn will drive the cost up of buying wholesale internet. So we're trying to redefine that map by building a facility in Kansas and drawing those providers to build it in there. Because the IXPs are where these wholesale internet providers, it's their marketplace. It's where they sell wholesale internet. So if you have 1, here's their price. If you have 3, there's market competition for selling their prices and it drops their price down. We actually got into this game because we've done contracting work with the state of Iowa for over a decade now. And the governor came to our organization in 2017 and say, our K through 12 schools pay way too much for internet. Figure out a way to solve that. Literally that broad. Said, figure out a way to make it cheaper for internet. We said, okay. We kind of scratched our head. We said, okay, we're going to create a consortium of 40 school districts between Ames and Iowa City. We got 40 districts to sign up and say, we will work together to help you solve this issue. And we looked at what is your problem, and we found that they were all purchasing internet. We call it E-rate when we're talking about school districts. They were purchasing their E-rate from Chicago. Well, that means they were having to buy transit from their school district to Chicago. They were paying about $3.86 or 84 cents, $3.84 a megabit for internet. We said, this is ridiculous. Why don't we took an old repurpose, like a data center that was built but never used by a local government, and said, can we use this as an interconnection point? It wasn't a true IXP, just an interconnection point. And then we put out an RFP of the 40 school districts to say they will buy internet from wholesale providers from this building. 3 different carriers said, we will run internet to that building and sell you internet for 30 cents a megabit. So we reduced all 40 school districts' cost overnight by 90%. They went from $3.84 a megabit to 30 cents overnight. And this now that project completed in 2018, just overnight, because all of a sudden they were buying internet locally instead of buying from Chicago. They just reduced their transit cost. Nowadays, the prices have gone down. They're paying between 8 and 10 cents a megabit nowadays for that cost. So this is the difference that can really make. So it's not just you at home, it's school districts that are purchasing their own internet. They're having to buy that transit. And honestly, school districts do a phenomenal job at a lot of things, but most people in IT don't necessarily understand how to purchase internet. They know how to connect to it, they know how to network it, but they don't necessarily know how to purchase it. And so they just think this is the way the internet is. I have to buy from wherever they're at. They're not thinking, what if I got them to come to me and I purchased? So that's what we were trying to rethink that. And that's actually what started us on this plan, because our organization works primarily on solving that digital divide, which is a lot of times in rural America. But even as I live in Shawnee, Kansas, but it was only a couple of years ago that DeSoto, a part of Johnson County, part of that major metro, just got high-speed internet. They were functionally running on DSL until about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, when a fiber provider came in, and the city had to subsidize the fiber provider to come in and build. So it's not just these rural communities. I mean, it's major metros on the outer sides of it. I'm sure many of you who represent cities that are just outside a larger community say, yeah, a lot of my constituents actually don't have internet. So it's larger than just rural America that we often think of. But that's the issue we started solving, and we thought to ourselves, wow, we've completely missed this. We need to start focusing on how do you bring IXPs to more communities and more areas, because that is a missing part of the equation. And we're going to solve the bandwidth digital divide and then just have a brand new one that's latency. And our world is becoming more and more latency dependent. As we're getting into automation, AI, more streaming services, more, self-driving cars. Self-driving cars are very latency dependent. You don't want to be driving in a self-driving car or on a road with self-driving cars that are having a latency of 40 milliseconds. That's the difference between hitting you and stopping. So you're going to need more interconnection points to continuously drive down latency as our world continues to advance. I mean, hospitals are experimenting with remote surgeries, where you could have the best brain surgeon in the world out of Kansas City, doing a procedure in a more rural hospital, because they have high-speed internet access, low latency, and they can do that surgery from there. But you need really low latency, because high latency is, oh yeah, we just took a part of your brain out we didn't mean to, versus successful surgery. We removed the tumor. If you want to go to the next slide. So we were excited that actually the state of Kansas created what was a state first, and any state is creating a grant program to build an IXP within their state. We were fortunate to receive that grant, and we are building it in partnership with WSU, Wichita State University, and we are building it right across the street from their innovation campus. on their property. And so this is going to be fantastic because Wichita is, fairly central to the state. It's the largest city in the state. It has a huge metro population around it. But it's not just going to service that area. It's going to become an interconnection point that can service the entire southern, central, and western half of the state. It is going to cut that distance that internet has to travel because this is going to be a full facility. So we are planning to have it have no functional difference than what you'd get in Kansas City, Chicago, New York City, Dallas, where we're bringing interconnection for ISPs, but we're also going to bring the cloud and content providers in here. We want, Netflix, Google, Meta, all these companies to physically interconnect and have their own servers where they're caching their content locally in here. So you're not having to drive out of state to send your traffic to access these cloud and content providers. Netflix is a little weird one because they figured out a strategy. At one point, Netflix was literally 50% of the bandwidth of the entire United States. And they're still an absurdly high percentage. I would actually love to see that current. They are an absurdly high percentage of the bandwidth of the entire internet in the United States. So they figured out their own system where they went to all their ISPs and said, you have to give us a local server in your facility that caches. But we've been in conversations with Netflix and they love what we're doing because they said that's great, but it's really cumbersome for us to have to service and maintain thousands of these independent little interconnection caching servers at these facilities. We would rather be able to consolidate into a region like this. So we're already having conversations with all of these major, we call them hyperscalers, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks of the world, about doing this and receiving pretty wide support from them. So we know our ability to bring these networks in here is going to be pretty quick. Additionally, we have a partnership with a company called DKIX, DE-CIX. They are the largest internet exchange in the world. An internet exchange, so internet exchange point is a physical building that allows interconnection. The internet exchange is the actual switch in the facility. It is, you'd walk in and it would be on a rack, and that is actually what interconnects all these cloud and content providers. DKIX, being the largest internet exchange in the world, has the most cloud and content providers in their network of anyone. They are going to put a switch in our facility. So that means if we don't have that cloud and content provider in our facility, they will be able to have a one-hop connection. In this case, we'll have one to Kansas City and one to Dallas, where they can access their entire network and bring it back. So to use another analogy, because I love them, so I learned in the legislature, it's like we are putting an airport in to Kansas City. If you can't access what you want, or into Wichita, if you can't access what you want, you are going to have a nonstop flight to anywhere you want to go from a cloud and content perspective. Right now, you have some of that, but there's oftentimes where you're bouncing from location to location to get that cloud and content. By bringing DKIX in as our internet exchange partner, you will have virtually nonstop flights to every single cloud and content provider that you don't have locally in that facility. What that will do is that will make the facility grow astronomically faster because these cloud and content providers, they monitor their traffic. They know how many people are accessing their data from every location. So they will see, hey, we have a lot of traffic going from our Dallas facility to our Wichita facility. Okay, they've surpassed our threshold. We are going to go rent space directly in that facility now. Now you don't need a nonstop flight because they've come to you. So that is how these communities work. They will go where the traffic is. It is advantageous for the cloud and content providers to locally cache their content where you are. They just need to see X amount of traffic go there. So this will allow us to grow this facility. And we believe over 3 to 5 years, the entire central part of Kansas will have functionally no difference in internet access, latency, costs than any major metro in the United States. There's just a couple of pictures if you want to go to the next one. This is what it looks like. It's about a 3,000 square foot facility. They're modular in design. So what happens as we get more demand, we can take a wall out and put a new wall in, or put a new 25 cabinet modular in. So we can keep expanding as long as we have room. So what this does is allows us to cost efficiently build this. A lot of times private equity comes in and they want to build 40, 50, $100 million facilities or $1 billion data centers with one of these within it. Well, that doesn't make sense in places like Wichita, Kansas today. So we're right sizing and building a facility that is efficient and needed today, and then can expand it as the traffic continues to grow to meet the needs both today and the needs of tomorrow in the long term future. They are ballistic rated. They can survive a 175 or 180 mile per hour winds. They should be able to be just fine being hit by an F5 tornado, but let's hope, especially as it's on Wichita State's campus, that we never find out that any tornado hits it. But we take the security very seriously of these. These are of the highest tier in data center construction. Even though these are not data centers, they look like them, but it's similar construction for it. They'll have 2 backup generators that provide over 72 hours of uptime in case power goes down, so that service is not interrupted to them. If you want to go to the next slide. This is kind of a top-down view. I mean, again, if you walked in, you'd think you're in a data center. The difference is the power profile for a data center is significantly higher. These are quiet. These are pulling significantly less electricity usage as a data center because they're not doing storage and compute. They're just providing interconnection. If you want to go to the next one. And then that's just kind of a top-down view of what it looks like if you take the ceiling off. Additionally, for my friends in the Wichita region, I know there was a little bit of concern over what the infrastructure will look like based on past issues with polls. And so we've actually had a lot of people reach out locally to us, and we're doing a lot of community engagement down there, telling people like, yes, this is a utility infrastructure, but everything is underground. So we don't want things above ground. We want them to build underground where there's no option of people cutting things. We'll actually build 2 manholes on 2 different points of entry. And then, I mean, these will be large enough where you can go stand in it. And so what companies will do is they just have to pull their fiber into there, and then we pull it in and pull it. We have tubes that will shoot it into the facility itself. So we're not re-tearing up the ground, burying it, re-tearing up the ground, burying it to add new providers. They just have to get to that manhole, and then we pull everything in. And with that, I would open myself up to questions about anything I went over. See a little bit of concern from Representative Hoheisel.
You have a right to be concerned. First question, I believe, is from Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Tom, thanks for the information. The last part interested me as what is the power demand by these IXPs?
If I don't have that in here, I can get that. It's a 350 kilowatt power for a 25 cabinet. So about 350 kilowatt consumption.
KWH is different than what the demand is, but so how many cabinets would you have?
Initially, this facility will have 25 when it's the first operational, but we actually think the demand within year 1 is going to necessitate ordering another 25 cabinets. I'll get that the exact. I have all of that in documents. I didn't put it in here.
It should be in like a megawatts or something like that. That's the capacity that would be needed to serve that.
Yeah, it's a very low power profile for what you'd think of, but I'll get that and send it out to you with the exact power consumption.
Okay.
But yeah, it's people are surprised. It's substantially lower than what people think.
Well, just to follow up on that, this is just a switching center, so this isn't a server farm that really sucks a lot of juice.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very low. It's very confusing because it looks like a data center. It has backup generators because you have to have them. But it is a very low power consuming because, I mean, actually, what we call the meet me room, which is a server of racks that just is interconnection. So you say, hey, I have 50 people in here and this person wants to talk to 48 of them. Okay, just go over to the meet me panel and choose who you want to connect with. So it gives each operator the option of who do they want to directly peer with. That doesn't actually require power. That blew my mind. That section literally is just fiber connecting each other. You don't even need I was like, so where's the power? Like, where's the electric cables? Like, there isn't any. This is just it's a switchboard. If they're connected, they talk to each other. Now the other side of it has your caching servers have to have power, but the interconnection point, they don't require any electricity to actually run, which blew my mind when I saw that. It took me a minute to wrap my head around that.
All right. Next up, Representative Hoheisel has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, former Representative Cox, for being here today. Representative Schreiber took my first question. My second question is security of these facilities. I assume it would be some kind of critical infrastructure.
Hmm.
What kind of security, especially data security, stolen data, hacks from overseas, is it susceptible to any of that?
So I'll start with the physical security. So we will have a perimeter fence around it that will be fully secure, but also aesthetically pleasing because we care very much about the community and we don't want it to be an eyesore. And we're working very closely with both the city of Wichita and WSU to make sure that it meets all of their high standards. Because WSU wants to promote this. They want to say, we have this on our campus as they're bringing more and more businesses to their campus, their innovation campus on there. So we're working with them to make sure it's very aesthetically pleasing, but fully secure. Cameras around the entire perimeter, hard to access. You can't just bust into this place like it's ballistic rated. But also, even if you did get in the front door, there's a man trap. So you access one door, and then you have to be able to get through the second set of security to access it. And this is because people do deliveries, where we'll be able to remotely let them into the man trap to deliver things to this, and then it goes into a delivery spot that our staff can then come. So, like, let's say Google is like, "Hey, we want another 5 racks. We're going to send you our equipment to install." So they would have it delivered there. It would be the person delivering it would not have access to the actual inside of the facility. They would be able to go into the man trap and put it in the delivery area. And then our people would be able to get into both, take it out of the delivery area and actually go install it. From a cybersecurity standpoint, that's actually the beauty thing. That is all reliant on the independent network operators. So it is their security. Like, we don't get into the security game because it's their private networks, right? So whatever standards they have are what the secure network security will be. Now, this is not a vulnerability. So if one person is connecting in here and they're not very secure, there's no way to access everyone else from that aspect. It's not you don't create that fail point because these are private networks that are interconnecting. I mean, you can't, they're just talking to each other. You can't use one network to then hijack another network because it's not secure. So we actually, in multiple cities, we're looking at building these. We actually have support from military institutions wanting us to build either on their facilities or directly adjacent to them. Kirkland Air Force Base down in Albuquerque, they specifically said, we want this. They wrote a letter of support for a federal grant we applied for. The colonel of the facility said, we are actually weighing in. We need this. They're a nuclear facility. And they were like, we need this for our cybersecurity infrastructure. We need this direct connection instead of where we're running to right now. So we know we will have defense contracting, military, DoD accessing our facilities. So they will also be at the top standard.
Mr. Chair, if I may follow up, are there any regulatory challenges you guys are facing right now?
None so far. You know, our biggest hurdle is education. People don't know what an IXP is. I didn't know what an IXP was until I started working with this organization. And they explained it. It was like, oh, that makes sense. I guess the internet does have to go somewhere to talk to each other. I never really thought of that. I just get on my computer and it works or it doesn't work. Every time it buffered or I got my little spinning wheel, I thought my internet's not very fast. I never thought about the fact that that's probably a latency issue and not a bandwidth issue. Because I'd be like, man, I'm getting 500 megabits down right now. Like, why can't I access this? Why is this website loading so slowly? What's a latency issue? It's just the data that's traveling. So a lot of what we're doing is, and why I'm here today, is education campaign, letting people know what this is. As I said, working with the vice chair, he said, why don't we do a little bit of briefer of more expansive on kind of how the internet works in general. Thus, for my comically blatant title for what the presentation was about. I should have mentioned that,
just so you know, you've been Bill Auto'd, so it's on Twitter now.
I'm glad to see that Twitter account is still very active.
I want to follow up on the buffering or the spinning wheel. So I stream sporting events, football games live, and there's usually a 45, 50 second, maybe even a minute lag between the actual play and the play getting to my TV. does this help with that?
This very well could. That can be a lot of issues because that can be where's the original. It's where's the content originating, right? I mean, even if you're on TV, like a traditional cable, you can still have a delay at times because you're just sending so much data over what's live and what's there. But yes, in theory, this should help reduce that of getting data to you faster. But it could just be that when you're streaming and it's going through that process, they have more servers that essentially, hey, we've got to go from filming it to a server and then send it out across the internet. So there typically are delays, but you are reducing by doing this. You're hoping to reduce that distance that things are traveling. Sporting events are a little more difficult than others because they're happening physically at a location. You have to get that data across the United States somewhere else. So you're always going to have some level of distance traveled on that. That's more difficult. It's actually if you have been watching Thursday Night Football, I think it was Amazon Prime this year, and a lot of people were complaining about the quality wasn't great. There's interruptions. Well, they're trying to solve a problem people haven't tried to solve. How do you exclusively stream a live sporting event? And so that was really their issue. They're saying we're trying our best, but this is really, really difficult. Of saying we're taking a live event, streaming it, and distributing it internationally instantly. And their service got service got better throughout the season because they're solving that problem. But no one else had really effectively tried to do what they were doing in that strict context before.
Are you working with any local legislators down there in that area on this project?
This we had not worked with any. We'd kept leadership involved as both in the House and Senate. But it was a state grant that used state, local, and fiscal recovery funds, remaining funds, to create what was called the LINK program, a $30 million grant program. And part of it was eligible to build an IXP. Now, we did have the support to create that LINK program was Senate President Masterson, at the time Speaker Reichman, and then the Lieutenant Governor. So we worked with them pretty extensively on education of why this should be a valuable thing. But we have, we're trying to reach out to more and more legislators to inform them of this project. I've met with the bulk of the city council down there and the mayor as well to inform them of this project. And actually, our entire team will be down there next week meeting with WSU's leadership team as our formal kickoff, as we actually hope to break ground in the next month.
Well, former Representative Cox, I hope you didn't meet with that liberal Hoheisel on the Wichita City Council.
We did meet with the good Hoheisel, as I was
the good Hoheisel as well.
The good Hoheisel. No, I think they're both great Hoheisels. I'm on the record. I appreciate you and your brother's commitment to public service.
We have other questions. I don't want to get caught. I don't want to get caught in a man trap here. So we'll move to the next Representative Penn.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for being here today, and I appreciate the primer and the slides that you had. I think they were very intriguing and well put together. This is always a difficult concept for a lot of folk to wrap their minds around, so thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, for having this today as well. It seems like everybody stole all my questions. So, hold on. I can, but I can always come up with more. So when we are looking at this on the heels of what Representative Hoheisel was saying, as far as who all you all engaged before we were having a sidebar conversation, I know in the Senate you took a couple of heat rounds as well from one of our colleagues across the way. My commendation to yourself and to other members is if you ever have a project, don't stovepipe this and keep it amongst a certain clique. Let everybody know, because we have constituencies that need to know what's coming into their neighborhoods. If there's opportunities for them to be impacted positively or negatively, have us read in as well. Some might find that disrespectful if you only keep it as into a closed circle and then unleash it. I think your slide says that you're breaking ground in February. That's next week, right?
Yeah, we only received the grant in December, and then the holidays hit, and so that was our goal, is to reach out to.
Said you've been cooking this since Reichman was the speaker. Is that right?
Well, they were on the Spark committee to create that program and to send it over to the Department of Commerce to create a grant to apply for.
But you understand my point.
Yeah, I do, and that's what we're trying to do. That educational campaign right now is reaching out to people, and yeah, absolutely
on the front end, not on the back end. Mm. On the front end, not on the back end. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was, this is going to Hoheisel's point. critical infrastructure, if you will, concerning comms inside of the U.S. Was there any thought toward putting this down at the air base down in Wichita?
We actually did have initial conversations about land down there. And it was actually Wichita State said, no, we want this on our campus. And the Wichita location is better from a infrastructure standpoint and internet connectivity and how much fiber, how much cable is running through there and their ability to pull in faster and cheaper. But we actually looked at plots of land down there as well. But WSU came back and said, we have a plot of land. We want this on our campus. And so we said, okay, you are our partner in this project. If that's what you want, then we think that's perfect. And it honestly was a better location than anything we found in the southern part of the city.
I understand. And when we're looking at, just how do you protect something that would be this massively impactful as you laid out, you think about how many bad actors would love to get in on this piece if it's just sitting on Wichita State University and not necessarily, protected as well as it could be. I did this in the military, so the other question I had is, were there any concerns or any thoughts toward expanding this on that same footprint if there's more of a load or need in the future, if it becomes a good hub for an IXP and they want to do additional facility? And here's why I'm going to that. We've heard tell that we've done this before with Panasonic, and now they want to move and do a new facility as well and expand. So can you give us a preview before the show? Do you foresee that happening as well?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, it's modular design. What we're building initially is just for today. I mean, we expect to have to expand within the first year and add more cabinets. So it's on a rectangular piece of land.
I mean,
a new facility. Oh, we don't foresee that anytime in the near future. I mean, our ability to expand this specific facility is pretty large. So we're building on the eastern side of the lot, and it's a rectangle, so we have a lot to build on the western side. So we won't need to build a second facility. That would be bad planning by us if we designed it in a way that we'd need to build a second facility in a community. I mean, this fundamentally should be able to, for the next 40 years, serve or longer. I mean, really, we do everything in 40 years because federal grants are like, it has to have a 40-year lifespan. So we talk in 40 years, but I mean, this facility itself has a 90-year lifespan for its physical infrastructure.
Sounds great. It sounds like a great program, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman. I'll quit with this. I will commend you both to City Hall as well as some of your partners up here to find out who you need to be reaching out to in order to socialize this amongst the residents and the citizens in the area so that you don't get blowback unnecessarily, okay?
Yeah, and we've had WSU has been a fantastic partner in connecting us with local advocates and helping guide us in that process on who to initially reach out to and talking to local communities. And like, for example, I've been engaged already with the local chapter leader of the NAACP who had a lot of concerns because anytime there's infrastructure, it felt like they were negatively impacted in the past. And so I have met with them, briefed them on the project, and they went from apprehension to excitement pretty quickly. And so we do take that community engagement very seriously. And I appreciate your feedback.
Outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Okay, we have a few other questions. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I may have missed it. When do you expect this facility to be online?
So our build time is scheduled as 18 months from when we break ground. It could be as soon as 12 months because it's just a supply chain issue. So right now in this world, getting HVAC systems is very hit or miss. During COVID and post COVID, people
would 1 or 2 years be within the realm of what you anticipate?
Oh, I'm expecting on the long end 18 months from February.
The second question is, if content providers co-locate on this site, would you anticipate that we will see data centers built across the street from Wichita State University with large power poles bringing the power into those facilities?
No, I will say one of the economic development benefits of this is that data centers do chase after IXPs. From a perspective, they would not, nor do I think the city would necessarily permit, or the university, a large full-scale data center being built right there. The innovation campus is mostly, but it would allow them to go to the more rural parts of the area and build and have the direct connection. Because
you would anticipate that data centers would be located off-site rather than co-located?
Correct, 100%.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so with an IXP, you have a 60-mile radius where the latency is negligible. If you are 1 mile from the facility and 59 miles from the facility, your latency is identical under that speed. So there's not necessarily a need for them to be directly next to it as long as they're in a certain radius and they can get a direct connection to the facility. There would be much cheaper, more I think interesting land to them, not directly to the facility. They'd get the same benefit.
All right, thank you. Representative Roth has a question.
Thanks for your presentation today. Thanks, Vice Chairman. Appreciate you letting me speak. So how many staff will be on site? Is this a staffed facility? You mentioned, deliveries and stuff. So is there staff? How many staff and what's the cost of that?
So it is what we call a dark facility. So there's not staff regularly in the facility. We have a remote knock where we can monitor and do almost everything other than installs remotely. So it helps reduce the cost as we'll have these across the nation. We'll have regional staff that will service multiple facilities in a region. So let's say they could be, they'll be kind of center to where these facilities are. So they can come actually do the installs. Now, in the Wichita State example, we have a pretty extensive partnership with the university, and we're going to allow them to use this as an educational facility. So one of the things is in their information systems, their IT programs, they will learn what an IXP is potentially, but they will have no real concept of it. So we want them to be able to utilize this as an education center where the students can come over and see or maybe potentially help with installations and have that firsthand experience and knowledge of, so when they're going out and entering the workforce, they can actually go, oh yeah, I've worked with direct interconnection before. I know how to set up a peering network, all these different aspects of it. So we will have more people in it than not as they're using it for educational purposes. And we may end up contracting directly with the university to be our installer. So like when they actually have to do installs, we may have someone there be like, okay, in this situation, why don't you guys use it both as your education platform, but also be the person who actually comes in and installs it. So we're very committed to what can we give back to the community. It's not just about the benefits of an IXP, but how can we utilize this to better the community in general.
One more question there.
Yeah, fairly.
Would you consider allowing students and people into this facility for education to be a security risk?
No, because it would all have to be pre-authorized, pre-screened. You're not going to let 40 students in there at a time. It'd have to be small groups with someone who's authorized to be in the facility. So that's what we'd either have to have that, whoever is our designated staff person there would have to also be present in all of that for that reason. The same way some legislators may have done tours of data centers or things like that. It's kind of the same thing. You're going to have to be kind of pre-cleared, and then you're with someone, so people aren't sitting there pulling wires and pressing buttons. Absolutely, that's a great question.
You're okay with that? All right. Okay, Representative O'Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, colleague, for coming back to make this presentation. Going back to your presentation with respect to the facility coming to Wichita State University, just want to follow up what Representative Penn had asked earlier. Were you guys in contact with community members or the community as a whole in regards to the plan, this particular facility coming in?
Once we received the grant, we have been, but we've really relied heavily on our partner WSU to do local engagement initially.
So therefore, you had no communication with the local residents. Is that what you're saying?
While we were doing the grant application?
No, during the facility itself.
Well, we haven't built it yet. So for the grant application period, no, we had not done local engagement. As soon as we received the grant, we said, hey, you're going to receive this grant. We started our local engagement before we break ground on this.
With who?
Well, we've again relied on WSU pretty heavily, but so I've started communication. One individual was the local chapter president of the NAACP.
Have a community meeting.
No, but that is going to happen in the future. So I'm working with Councilman Johnson on that. He's actually going to put something together and have me come down and actually speak to the community. And then I'm starting to go down fairly regularly to Wichita to engage in different groups. Meeting with a couple of council members, they were giving specific stakeholders to meet with. For example, the neighborhood right there, since it's a very light development project. compared to what other things are, because we're putting a concrete slab down, and this building is actually pre-built in a manufacturing facility, and they come and they put it together like Legos pretty much. So it has very minimal construction impact compared to what a lot of other infrastructure are, and it's fairly quick. Most of that lead time when we talked about that 12 to 18 months is actually waiting on them to build it in their facility and then ship it to us, and it's them mostly waiting on parts.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because when those polls came in, that was the problem that the problem that was pretty much that happened, whereby the community was kind of like blindsided as to what was coming in. So the same thing you're talking about, where you're in contact with just a few leaders, but not the community as a whole. It's kind of troubling.
And that's what we're working on. But this is building a small Starbucks would be significantly larger development project than what we're doing in terms of impact to the area. I mean, this is really, you're putting a concrete slab down and then putting a building, just putting putting a pre-built facility on top of it. And from an infrastructure standpoint, I mean, you're not putting in utility poles, you're not doing anything like that. You're just pulling from what's already there down in the ground and under. So you're not adding anything outside the exact little rectangle plot we're on, which is about 1.5 acres, I believe. That's the only thing that's being disturbed. We're not doing any building infrastructure, anything outside of that. And then the photos you saw that's as high as the building goes. Again, so the power poles run right next to our facility, not transmission, just regular. We just will, contract with Evergy to have someone pull the line down and then buried under the ground from us. The same way as if you added any building anywhere, they would try to connect, but we don't do over. Some people, do the over the air lines. We in this infrastructure, you can't really risk someone being able to cut that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. And just a couple of quick questions. On your slide where you talked about the highway system basically going around the state of Kansas absent having an IXP. So what are the physical assets that are built out on that highway system? Do you know what you're saying? That if we build an IXP, then I'm looking at this highway map that you put up there. So what are the physical assets that make this path?
Those are the long haul fiber. That's a long haul fiber route. So that's where these providers are putting conduit in the ground and running their own fiber. Sometimes they're building ducts where they may have multiple ducts to run different fiber in them. I'm sure you guys have heard a bit about the Kansas Middle Mile project to build it's a 7-way microduct. So it actually will have 7. I should have brought it. I actually have a piece of what that duct looks like. It's about this big and it has 7 smaller ducts in them, so people can put their fiber exclusively in their own duct. We actually are partnered with that project as well as a neutral administrator. So you're going to have 7 different people running fiber in there, and they all about every 60 miles have to regen light, have to have interconnection. Some of them will be selling services off of. So you have to build a facility called an ILA where that happens every 60 miles. And so you don't want one provider in there to control that, because then they go, well, that person may compete with me, so we don't want you in here. Or what happens a lot in the industry is when you have a neutral facility for interconnection, not like this, but like a manhole where multiple people are interconnecting, one provider may come in and fill the entire space with excess fiber. And they say, well, we needed that and we were first in. And so our job as the neutral administrator is to make sure everyone plays evenly. So we're going and managing that. So when the people do fiber pulls in there, we say, no, here's how much you get to pull yours in. You have to leave room for the next one. So we do have a role, and we're pretty excited about that with our neutral experience of helping the state, because KDOT will actually own that infrastructure. And then we will be in charge of, there's 3 of the 7 are already leased through partners in the grant. 4 of them are unleased. Our job will also be to go find those 4 partners. And I can't disclose who, but we already have 2 people knocking at the door, begging us to let them sign a lease agreement for those. And the other 2 will be very easy to lease. So we're excited about that project as well.
My final question is just, what role, if any, did the Office of Broadband have in this?
In the IXP part, just all of it.
To the grant? I mean, I just didn't know if they had a role in this. Or...
Yeah, they administered the grant. So the Spark committee said, hey, we're going to take $30 million and create this and give it to broadband the broadband office and say, create a grant, but here's some of the criteria. Some of it needs to go to last mile projects, and then we want to open up part of it dedicated to middle mile. What an IXP is considered part of middle mile infrastructure, but they specifically put in language saying we would like to see an IXP as part of it. So the broadband office administered the grant, and so we were awarded from their office.
Okay, that's really what I wondered. Did you have another question, Representative Roth? Quickly.
Thank you. And quickly, on cost reduction, is there any cost reduction by doing this to the community or the residents of Kansas in the costs of what they have to pay for internet connectivity?
Well, what I can say is this will provide for a lot of communities, especially smaller broadband providers, their ability to lower their transit costs, what they're having to pay to connect to the greater internet. Which we can't mandate anything, but nor would I want to mandate anything, but we'd hope that they will in turn pass those savings on to their consumers. Additionally, it also allows them to maybe potentially do more expansion in their community, saying, "Hey, our costs went down. Now it makes sense to go build to this next neighborhood." So that will be the direct translation. Now, from a government perspective, people who buy their own internet, oftentimes hospitals and school districts, they will see a positive impact in the reduction in cost, which if it's taxpayer funded, like a school district, that's a net benefit for all the taxpayers.
All right. Seeing no more questions, I want to thank the committee for your questions and good discussion. And thank you, Tom, Mr. Cox, for your presentation today. And it was very informational, and I think we all learned something from that. So with that, we will be back together on the first day of February, which is going to be Thursday already. We're in February. We'll be talking through the report from the interim committee and have a discussion on net metering and a hearing on HB 20.